A South Korean Coast Guard patrol team was on duty at sea when they discovered a seemingly quiet fishing boat straying into a military zone. The captain radioed the fishing boat, but there was no response. They requested confirmation from headquarters, but the Naval Command confirmed the boat was unregistered and had no records. A special forces team was dispatched to investigate. After approaching the vessel and finding no sign of an ambush, they boarded the ship. They found many dead from an apparent attack, with only 4 survivors, all North Korean defectors. They were taken aboard the Coast Guard vessel. A military doctor struggled to stop the bleeding of one man, his skills seemingly lacking. 3 doctors arrived by helicopter, looking cool and confident. Lieutenant Ko Yoon-ho greeted them. 2 were doctors and 1 was a nurse from Doldum Hospital. Before they could treat the patients, they were asked to sign a confidentiality agreement, stating that all matters related to the ship must be kept absolutely secret. They could ask about medical equipment, but could not learn anything else. Failure to comply would result in legal consequences. Without hesitation, Co Woo-jin signed, eager to assess the patient. Meanwhile, Dr. Jang was on the way to find Master Kim for help, as after examining the patient, Yong-in-soo and Co Woo-jin realized the man was losing a lot of blood, and the bullet was still lodged in his abdomen. If not removed quickly, it could damage vital veins. Finally, they found Master Kim, on vacation fishing by the river. They explained the patient's condition and gave him the phone so he could speak to Dr. Yong-in-soo. Hearing the urgency of the situation, Master Kim instructed them to remove the bullet and control the bleeding first, and he would be there soon. A helicopter was ready to transport him to the Coast Guard vessel. Back on the ship, Dr. In-soo, Woo-jin, and Nurse Yoon-tak began operating on the patient. They successfully removed the bullet but struggled to minimize blood loss. The patient was in critical condition. His heart stopped. The military doctor was called upon to perform CPR. Outside, Master Kim arrived. The patient's daughter was also coughing up blood. Dr. Jang and Cha Yoon-ti went to check on her, allowing Master Kim to operate on the male patient. His arrival brought a sense of reassurance. After examination and surgery, Master Kim successfully stopped the bleeding. Now they needed to assess the damage to the veins. He noticed liver damage and a damaged kidney, so he quickly stitched up the open wound. This impressed the military doctor, who was amazed at Master Kim's skill. The patient's condition stabilized. They planned to transfer him to Doldum Hospital for a second operation, but the Coast Guard intervened. They said the patient and the other survivors could not leave for another 18 hours. Meanwhile, Dr. Jang Dong-ha and Yong-yoon-ti had stabilized the female patient. In the captain's office, Master Kim was anxious to check on the patient, arguing that transferring him was crucial to avoid another critical situation. But the captain insisted his orders were just as important as saving lives. He explained that the 4 survivors were illegal immigrants and North Korean defectors. Even the patients had to be treated in secrecy, keeping it from public knowledge. A helicopter was immediately prepared and the news relayed to the waiting doctors. The North Korean father and daughter were loaded onto stretchers and transported to Doldum Hospital. Doctors at the hospital were already on standby, prepared for the situation Master Kim had relayed overnight. They were aware of the extraordinary circumstances, but the critical issue was finding a secret location with minimal personnel. Master Kim's decision was to use the newly constructed trauma center, but it wasn't yet licensed to operate. Director Jang wouldn't agree, worried that being caught using an unlicensed facility would result in its closure, with severe consequences. But the helicopter carrying the patients and the doctor arrived, and everyone disembarked and began preparing the equipment. Everything was brand new, making the North Korean father and daughter the first patients of this new center. Master Kim wondered how Nurse Chief Oh could have persuaded the difficult Director Jang to open the place. But it wasn't a voluntary decision. It was a matter of necessity, forced upon them. They were preparing to perform surgery to save lives, but it was an illegal act. Master Kim knew this, so he urged everyone to support each other and overcome this hurdle. The next day, the surgery was completed, and the North Korean father and daughter pulled through the crisis. They breathed a sigh of relief, feeling safe. Their main task now was to keep the entire situation a secret and prevent any leaks. Meanwhile, President Park was meeting with Professor Cha, a renowned doctor with top-notch skills, and also Yoon-tae's father. President Park was there to invite him to work at their trauma center. After some persuasion and listening to President Park's proposal, Professor Cha agreed and expressed his desire to visit their hospital soon. At the trauma center, Director Jang was panicking about how to get rid of them when President Park called. He lied, saying he was about to leave, when President Park Min-guk and Professor Cha walked in. With no other choice, Director Jang said that there was an emergency and called Master Kim over. A somewhat awkward three-way meeting ensued. Professor Cha and Master Kim were both highly skilled doctors, with no peers. Despite Master Kim's offer of a handshake, Professor Cha blatantly refused, approaching Yoon-tae and greeting her warmly. Everyone was surprised to learn about their father-daughter relationship. However, there seemed to be some tension between Professor Cha and his daughter, Yoon-tae, during their reunion. Master Kim replied that the inspection was merely a formality and that they were doctors fulfilling their duty, focusing on saving lives rather than paperwork. At that moment, Yoon-tae and Dr. In-soo received a message regarding the patient's condition. Master Kim, understanding the situation, urged them to tend to their duties, assuring them that everything was fine. Professor Cha, however, didn't seem to be easily appeased. He continued to ask questions but received evasive answers from Master Kim. He then declared that the center would be closed for a few days due to a confidential matter, seemingly a declaration of war between these two skilled doctors. The atmosphere was thick with tension, like a dragon and tiger battling. Meanwhile, the news about the North Korean patients being treated in South Korea reached the North Korean representatives attending the summit. They demanded a valid explanation, otherwise, the summit between North Korea and South Korea would immediately cease. The scene shifted back to the patient, who was experiencing another critical episode, his heart stopping. Master Kim and In-soo started CPR and contacted Dr. Jang to call him over. However, the young doctor was busy playing video games at home and didn't care about the life or death situation. The team at the center quickly performed surgery to stabilize the patient's vital signs back to normal. After a while, everyone breathed a sigh of relief as the patient pulled through. But then, President Park and government officials arrived, demanding that Master Kim return the patients to the ship immediately, as the summit was being disrupted by this information. Of course, Master Kim refused. His professional conscience and the patient's critical condition wouldn't allow him to send them away, which was tantamount to denying them a chance to live. Their arrival served as an announcement, leaving Master Kim feeling powerless and uncertain about what to do. At that moment, Dr. Jang, probably called too many times, finally reached the hospital, only to be met with In-soo and Yoon-tae's anger, who reprimanded him. They then entrusted him with the care of the critically ill patient from earlier that morning before leaving to continue their work. He came to remind Woo-jin that Yoon-tae was his precious daughter and that there was no problem in their family until Woo-jin appeared. These words made Woo-jin contemplate his relationship with Yoon-tae. At 4 p.m. that day, there was a critical event scheduled at the center, a 30-minute electrical inspection starting at 4 p.m. Electricians were already outside, starting their work. Inside, Master Kim, unaware of the impending event, called In-soo to diagnose the patient's condition. After discussion, they decided to operate on the patient before he was transferred that night. President Park, walking around, overheard this and was enraged at Master Kim. Soon, the team, led by Master Kim and Yoon-tae, the best of the best, began the surgery. Meanwhile, the healthy North Korean man wanted to use the bathroom. He snatched a medical syringe on his way. The male bathroom was occupied by Dr. Jang, who was engrossed in his game. He was unaware of the danger approaching when the man entered. The man used the syringe's cord to subdue the National Intelligence Service agent and forced him to log out. He then spotted Dr. Jang and captured him to use as a bargaining chip. In-soo heard the commotion and arrived, but kept the North Korean man calm. Just then, the power went out, as scheduled. Director Jang, remembering the schedule, was too late. This plunged the operating room into darkness. The equipment shut down, causing a brief panic. President Park immediately called Director Jang to inquire about the incident, only to learn that they were in the middle of a surgery. The situation was out of control, so he rushed to the center, demanding that they turn the power back on. Master Kim urged everyone to stay calm, quickly regained his composure, and instructed them to use their phone flashlights to continue the surgery. Relying on his years of experience and renowned natural talent, Master Kim successfully completed the surgery. In-soo managed to stall until the National Intelligence Service agents discovered the situation, rescued him, and apprehended the assailant. Professor Cha, though silent, must have been partly impressed by Master Kim's skills. Later, everyone was sent back to the fishing boat. However, the news reported that 3 people had died and only 1 survived. This was a favor granted to Professor Cha by the minister, as he had saved the minister's life previously. The surviving person and the one sent back to North Korea was the vicious traitor. As a result, the summit proceeded as planned. The hospital welcomed the return of doctors Ah Riem and B Mun Jong, who had been away on assignments. Everyone celebrated their return and then went back to their life-saving work. A few days later, Dr. Cha called President Park, saying he would come to work at Doldum Hospital, but only on the condition that Master Kim, the talented doctor, be removed from the hospital. The president understood that Master Kim was not just a doctor, but the heart and soul of the hospital, especially the surgical department. Therefore, he refused Professor Cha's request. However, somehow he changed his mind, called Professor Cha back, agreed to the condition, and scheduled a start date for the following week. More surprisingly, Master Kim calmly accepted the request, even though working at the new trauma center had been his dream. The scene shifted to Woo Jin arriving at the hospital and finding his girlfriend sleeping soundly. He brought her a homemade tomato juice he had prepared, hoping to wake her up. They were teasing each other when a new doctor arrived and introduced himself. It was the military doctor from the incident on the Coast Guard ship. He had applied for a position at the hospital, admiring the skills and teamwork he had witnessed. Another doctor arrived to inform Woo Jin that a patient needed his diagnosis. They quickly began examining the patient, questioning Dr. Jang to confirm any unusual symptoms. However, while examining the patient, the man kept complaining of abdominal pain. This angered the patient's coach, who berated the athlete. This made Woo Jin slightly irritated with Dr. Jang, who had diagnosed the patient as if he was seriously ill. As a result, Dr. Jang continued to be mentored by Woo Jin, learning about the human aspect of the profession, from writing reports to examining patients. He was constantly running around, even being caught playing games secretly in the changing room by Woo Jin, who warned him. Master Kim noticed this and approached Woo Jin, advising him to take it slow with the teaching, no need to rush. The news about Professor Cha becoming the director of the trauma center reached all the doctors at the hospital. Nurse Chief Oh, upon hearing this, went to Master Kim to get a clear explanation. President Park, who was passing by at the time, could not bear to be unjustly accused and jumped in to defend himself, stating that he had not influenced Master Kim's decision at all. To prevent the argument from escalating further, Master Kim assured Nurse Chief Oh that he had made the decision himself. Nurse Chief Oh was confused about his decision. President Park then mentioned that Professor Cha had arrived and wanted to have a meeting with everyone. The two talented individuals met, clashing like fire and water. A few sarcastic remarks were exchanged, and they began to dislike each other. Seeing the rising tension, President Park decided to take Professor Cha on a tour of the area, reminding Master Kim that they hadn't signed a contract yet, and he could still keep him if he wanted. Meanwhile, Yoon-tae was excitedly welcoming her new colleague, even offering him the tomato juice her boyfriend had made for her. Wu Jin entered, naturally disliking this, making Dr. Lee nervous and unsure of what to do. But Professor Cha and President Park walked in for a tour, breaking the tense atmosphere and replacing it with tension between Yoon Tae and her father. Wu Jin, aware of the situation, directly asked Master Kim to explain everything clearly to everyone. He said that having someone with such high skills would be beneficial, so he hoped everyone would work hard and cooperate, understanding his decision. Yoon Tae couldn't believe that her father was about to become her boss. They hadn't been getting along, so she didn't understand why he chose Doldum Hospital. He explained that he had received an invitation from President Jang, and more importantly, he wanted to see her again. While buying coffee outside, Yoon Tae bumped into her ex-boyfriend, who was looking for her. She was very embarrassed and apologized for her father's presence. Wu Jin understood and quickly assured her that he would stay at the hospital for the time being, reassuring her that everything would be fine. Just then, the hospital received an urgent call about a critical emergency at the ski resort. When Wu Jin went to receive the patient, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was the same guy he had diagnosed as faking an illness earlier that morning. Putting aside his negative feelings, Wu Jin quickly assessed the situation, realizing the patient had a ruptured spleen and needed immediate surgery. Dr. Jang was there to assist, but he seemed distracted, overwhelmed by the amount of blood loss. This further annoyed Wu Jin, who immediately asked for someone else to replace him. The emergency treatment was successfully completed, and the patient was transferred to the operating room. There, Wu Jin continued to prove his abilities by successfully completing the surgery. But now, the next crucial step was to operate on the patient's dangerous broken leg. The priority was to help him recover so he could return to competitive sports. Wu Jin consulted with Master Kim, who suggested stitching up the nerves first, as not doing so would prevent the athlete from competing. However, Professor Cha was also present and immediately objected, arguing that not stitching the artery could lead to gangrene. Wu Jin confidently countered that the athlete's life would only have meaning if he could continue competing. Without further argument with Professor Cha Jin-man, the hospital's medical team exchanged determined glances and began the surgery. Seeing Master Kim expertly stitch the nerves, Dr. Jang, standing outside, took it as an opportunity to subtly mock Wu Jin. He suggested that it was Master Kim's support that allowed Wu Jin to reach his current position in the hospital and then left, arrogantly demanding to leave work early. However, fate had other plans. As he stepped outside, an unexpected scene unfolded. A fire had broken out, and the hospital was treating all the victims. The surgeons in the operating room were aware of the situation and Dr. B left to assist outside. Yoon Tae calmly continued the surgery, meticulously following each step under Master Kim's approving gaze. Outside, while examining an elderly woman, a nurse discovered a lighter in her hand. Considering the recent fire, everyone assumed she was the arsonist and called the police for an investigation. One of the fire victims seemed anxious when the doctors discovered the lighter, suggesting a hidden motive. Back in the operating room, the difficult part of the surgery was over. The remaining steps involved closing the wound, so Yoon Tae offered the opportunity to the newly arrived Dr. Lee. He was slightly nervous but began with enthusiasm. He appeared confident but still trembled slightly, causing the other doctors to feel apprehensive and confused. Noticing the situation, Yoon Tae gently suggested Dr. Lee go outside to help others, showcasing her exceptional skills. She recognized an injured woman as her neighbor, and the nurse informed her that the woman was suspected of being the arsonist. Yoon Tae found it strange because Yi Hyeon had seemed happy despite her son's rough lifestyle. Everything was prepared for Yi Hyeon's surgery, but her family hadn't signed the consent form. At that moment, the elderly woman vomited blood, her life hanging by a thread. Wu Jin tried to persuade her son again, but the son sobbed, saying he didn't have the money for the surgery. Hearing this, Master Kim instructed them to immediately operate on the patient, promising to cover 100% of the surgical fees. He then handed the consent form to the son, urging him to save his mother. This touched the son's heart, as well as the hearts of everyone present, and they encouraged him to agree so that his mother could be saved. At that moment, the suspected arsonist, feeling anxious, tried to slip away but was spotted by Yoon-tae, who chased after him. She bombarded him with questions about why he was leaving, calling for security. A 6'6" inches, 260 pounds security guard appeared, silencing the suspect. After investigation, they discovered that he was the actual arsonist, and Yi Hyun had been trying to stop him, leading to her injuries. Inside the operating room, the surgery continued, but this time, Master Kim wasn't in charge, allowing Woo Jin to take the lead. Everyone examined the patient's condition and proceeded with the surgery. After a blood test, they discovered that she had cancer, which stunned everyone in the room. Despite the revelation, they had to continue the surgery. In the end, everything went smoothly. Meanwhile, Professor Cha reprimanded his daughter, saying he didn't understand how they could perform a surgery that violated basic principles. However, his daughter disagreed, firmly asserting that Master Kim, whom she knew, would never break any principles. This made him a bit pouty, telling her to separate work from personal life and address him as professor instead of dad at work. This saddened Yoon-tae, as she felt she had done a good job that day but didn't receive any praise. He left coldly, making her even sadder. At that moment, Woo Jin entered, comforting his girlfriend. He praised her, saying she had done a great job that day, and they hugged each other warmly after a long day. The next day, Professor Cha and Yoon-tae went to work. A list of all the talented doctors at Doldum Hospital had been invited to work at the trauma center. In other words, Professor Cha wanted to put Master Kim in a difficult position by taking away his most valuable assistants. Woo Jin, knowing this, requested to be removed from the team. Professor Cha, teasing his daughter's boyfriend, suggested he was lacking confidence and didn't want to perform. This slightly angered Woo Jin, who glared at his father-in-law with a look like a bullet. Woo Jin stated that he didn't want to perform surgery to prove anything to anyone or to showcase his skills. He simply wanted to do it for Master Kim. He then left. Dr. Seo and Young In-soo followed him, trying to persuade him once more to work or at least give it a try before refusing, but Woo Jin didn't want to hear it. He wanted to do things his way. After hearing this, the other doctors and Master Kim were left scratching their heads. If Woo Jin continued to refuse, getting the budget for the trauma center from the provincial commissioner would be difficult. To force his favorite student to join everyone at the center, Master Kim had to implement a different plan. President Park immediately went to Dr. Jang and asked him to take Woo Jin's position at Doldum Hospital. Knowing that Dr. Jang lacked experience, Nurse Chief Oh was ready to assist him. Yoon-tae was incredibly uncomfortable watching her father and boyfriend at odds. With a sorrowful expression, she asked Woo Jin if working with his father-in-law made him uncomfortable. Woo Jin remained silent, unwilling to say anything further. He was also upset that he had never been able to publicly acknowledge his relationship with Yoon-tae to her father. The scene shifted outside. The patients that day were all in critical condition. One was in a coma after mistakenly drinking pesticide, while another was experiencing cardiac arrest and was in critical condition. This made the trauma center more urgent and tense than ever. A young boy with scratches was receiving an Roman 4 drip when his mother called. The boy said he only had minor injuries, but it seemed like the doctors were putting all their effort into saving the 2 secretaries who were seriously injured. No one had come to check on him. Nurse Chief Oh came to check on Han Yui's condition, but the boy insisted that he wasn't experiencing any pain or discomfort, only feeling cold. Nurse Oh covered him with a blanket and asked him to wait a bit until the doctors arrived. They didn't know that the boy was the son of the provincial representative. However, as soon as Nurse Chief Oh left, the boy became unconscious. At the same time, Master Kim was examining another patient with Woo Jin. Master Kim told Woo Jin that he didn't like his student's current attitude. He didn't understand why Woo Jin only focused on Professor Cha's flaws and held such a narrow-minded prejudice. It didn't prove anything. It just proved that Wu Jin was turning his back on all the critical patients who needed him. At that moment, a nurse entered and informed Wu Jin that a patient had been diagnosed with a ruptured liver and needed surgery soon. But the important thing was that Dr. Zhang was holding the scalpel, and he had no experience with surgery. Furthermore, he was operating alongside Professor Chad, increasing his pressure and making him nervous. Hearing this, Wu Jin, worried about the patient's life, showed up at the last minute and demonstrated his diagnostic skills. After examining the situation, he provided a detailed plan. Even Professor Chan nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Dr. Li was feeling embarrassed. Since starting, he had only been a hindrance and hadn't done anything right. Yun Ti encouraged him, saying that the incident in the operating room the previous day was just a way for her to give him more experience and that it was okay. After leaving, she happened to pass by the room of the boy with the scratches. Seeing him lying there, Yun Ti went to check on him and was horrified to discover that he was no longer breathing. She frantically pressed the alarm button and performed CPR. When he heard the alarm, Dr. Young In-soo realized he had forgotten about the patient. Earlier, Nurse Oh had told him to check on the boy. In-soo rushed to see the boy, only to be met with the worst possible sight. The boy had died due to his negligence. He was overwhelmed with guilt, and the worst part was that the boy's mother was the provincial representative, the same person they needed to get the budget from for the trauma center. Enraged by the loss of her son, the mother accused the doctors of negligence for abandoning her son, which led to his untimely death. She wouldn't stop there, she was going to sue them to the very end, and the doctor responsible would be held accountable. Dr. Young In-soo could only hang his head in shame. Professor Cha, after finishing the surgery, learned about the patient who had died, the provincial representative's son, and went to express his condolences and comfort her. Although he deeply regretted the loss of her son, he explained that the doctors weren't at fault for abandoning him, but rather her son wasn't a priority at that time. This easily misunderstood statement infuriated the grieving mother, who felt he was trying to defend his colleagues. He then recounted the cases he had just treated, including a patient in a coma and another who had a cardiac arrest, both of whom were her secretaries. He pointed out that she hadn't inquired about their condition and only cared about her son's life, then asked her who was in a more critical condition and who she would prioritize if she were in that position. Because her son hadn't explicitly stated his condition and could have answered her phone call, it was understandable that he wasn't prioritized over the other two cases. This left the mother speechless. Leaving the room, he also encouraged the doctors there, saying that while they were saddened by the patient's death, they shouldn't dwell on it, but stay clear-headed for the next case. As long as they didn't give up, second by second, there was nothing to be ashamed of. This changed everyone's perception of Professor Chow for the better. Back in his office, Professor Chow was reviewing a video recording of the surgery. Wu Jin walked in, invited by Professor Cha. He complimented Wu Jin, saying he was surprised by his exceptional skills. He then revealed that he knew about Wu Jin's relationship with his daughter. However, knowing didn't mean approving, so Professor Cha wanted Wu Jin to try harder. They sat down and discussed other surgery videos together. This harmonious scene made Yun Ti ecstatic. A little girl ran alone to the bus station and asked a janitor for directions to Doldum Hospital. She said she was looking for her father who worked there, but refused to tell his name. The kind janitor showed her the way and how to take the bus. While waiting for the bus, she saw a woman standing in the middle of the road with a truck speeding towards her. Despite her screams, the woman didn't move and was hit by the truck. The girl joined the paramedics who took the woman to Doldum Hospital. Confused, she looked around the hospital, trying to find her way. Dr. Kim appeared and asked her who she was and why she was there. When she told him she was looking for a man named Dr. Kim, he became curious and asked her further questions. The scene then shifted to Director Zhang witnessing this interaction, thinking the girl was Dr. Kim's long-lost daughter. He quickly spread the news to everyone in the hospital, making it a hot topic. Meanwhile, Wu Jin and his colleagues were in the emergency room, examining the woman. Her condition was critical, and even surgery was risky. However, Wu Jin decided to proceed, believing that there's still hope as long as she's breathing. Professor Cha entered and stated that the situation looked grim, adding that operating without the family's consent would create many complications. He suggested giving up on the patient, but Wu Jin disagreed. This wasn't how their hospital operated. Even if the patient was in a critical condition, they would still try to save her. The woman's mother arrived and collapsed in despair upon seeing her daughter. The scene shifted to Director Zhang and his assistant who, out of curiosity about the girl's relationship with Dr. Kim, followed them. However, they were quickly discovered by Dr. Kim, who was on the phone and didn't notice them. The call was from Yoon Tae, updating him on the patient's condition. Professor Cha was explaining to the Guardian that surgery was pointless because the woman's chances of survival were low. The mother looked at the name tag and recognized Professor Cha, accusing him of being a demon doctor who caused her daughter's suffering. Dr. Kim was also present, and after hearing about the patient's condition, he took the mother's hand and comforted her. He promised to do everything he could, urging her to stay calm. As they prepared for surgery, Professor Cha objected, questioning why they were focusing solely on the patient without considering their own doctors. Dr. Kim gently responded that saving a patient was a doctor's duty. He revealed that he knew the girl, who was a victim of the humidifier incident 12 years ago. He also knew that this incident was related to Professor Chan, explaining the mother's rage. At the same time, Dr. Young received a call from his wife, informing him that their daughter was missing. It turned out that the little girl was actually his daughter. He argued with his wife for neglecting their daughter and demanding money, then rushed to find her. The surgery began, with every moment counting. They successfully stopped the bleeding and the surgery was a success beyond everyone's expectations. However, tragedy struck when the police informed the mother that her daughter had attempted suicide. This meant that, according to the state organ donation law, the patient would not be eligible for a lung transplant, rendering the successful surgery meaningless. Moreover, the family would be burdened with the massive cost of the surgery. Dr. Kim was devastated. Knowing he wouldn't be able to save the girl for long, he returned to his room, feeling defeated. Outside, Dr. Jung frantically asked the police to find his daughter. He searched everywhere with growing anxiety until he heard she was at Dr. Kim's room. He rushed there, relieved to find his daughter sleeping soundly. He turned to Dr. Kim and apologized for her presence. It had been a long time since father and daughter had been together. Dr. Kim understood his situation and reassured him, saying he had met with his daughter and knew what was going on. He had given them some space for their reunion. The scene shifted to the next day. Wu Jin happened to be at his usual restaurant and ran into Young In-soo and his daughter. They sat down together, and the girl, to everyone's surprise, revealed that she knew about the previous day's accident. This meant she hadn't attempted suicide and would be eligible for organ donation. Upon hearing this news, the woman's mother burst into tears, her hope rekindled. Director Park gathered everyone and announced that he wanted Chairman Oh to perform the lung transplant surgery as a way to win over the public. Before entering the operating room, Professor Cha approached the patient's mother and asserted that he had done nothing wrong 12 years ago, and even now, as a doctor, he would do his best to save her daughter. The surgery began, watched by a multitude of eyes. Sometime later, Director Park was attending a meeting to request funding for the trauma center from the provincial representatives. He ran into the female commissioner there from the earlier meeting. After his presentation, the representatives decided to discuss it and inform him of their decision later, ending the meeting. The commissioner approached Director Park, her tone filled with bitterness. He expressed his condolences for her son's situation, but emphasized that if she continued to obstruct the funding request, it wouldn't just be her son, but many other patients who would suffer due to lack of resources. However, the woman, unable to forget her son's loss, simply left. Meanwhile, Wu Jin was jogging in the cold weather when he bumped into a young man acting strangely. Wu Jin advised him to go to the hospital to get his injured leg checked, but the man insisted on taking care of it himself. He took a few steps, but then collapsed due to pain and the cold. Wu Jin quickly brought him to the trauma center, which was currently receiving 4 critically injured patients from a shooting incident at a nearby military base. Due to the shortage of doctors, Nurse Oh requested Professor Cha to call for Dr. Kim's assistance, but he refused, saying they should assess the patient's conditions first before making a decision. Nurse Oh retorted that every second counted in an emergency situation. Wu Jin brought the injured man for examination. Strangely, the man kept his bag close by. Wu Jin then received a call from the trauma center about a shooting victim. Hearing this, the injured man's expression turned unsettling. Wu Jin, realizing the urgency, left to attend to the shooting victim. Dr. Ariam, meanwhile, was feeling more at ease with her boyfriend's support. The injured man surprisingly knew Nurse Park Yoon-tak, but their interaction seemed to be fueled by resentment rather than friendship. At the trauma center, the newly admitted shooting victims required immediate surgery. Dr. Jang, however, was stuck in a traffic jam due to heavy snowfall while out for lunch. Professor Cha, meanwhile, was leisurely strolling around the area, much to Dr. Kim's annoyance. He asked Dr. Kim to handle everything, claiming he didn't have any experience with gunshot wounds. Outside, Director Jang noticed something suspicious while enjoying his noodles. The soldiers were all armed, and the perpetrator of the shooting was still at large. He tried to get closer to investigate the situation. At the same time, Director Park, anxious about the situation at the trauma center, called Professor Cha to check on the progress. Professor Cha tried to explain that he would be back to the hospital soon. But to his surprise, Director Park's car was stuck in the same traffic jam. The patients urgently needed blood transfusions. Dr. Kim called Professor Cha, asking if he was near the blood bank. Professor Cha looked around and luckily found the blood bank a few cars away. He immediately ran to the blood bank to collect the blood and then ran back to the trauma center. Understanding the urgency, Director Park joined him, carrying the blood together. Inside, Dr. Kim and Yoon-tae were struggling to stabilize the patients due to the critical shortage of blood. Just when the situation was most dire, Director Park and Professor Cha arrived at the center with the blood. The timely blood transfusion stabilized the patients. Director Park and Professor Cha, both freezing cold, had made the selfless sacrifice. In a different operating room, Wu Jin and Dr. Jang had finished a surgery. Wu Jin didn't forget to praise Dr. Jang to encourage him to keep fighting. Meanwhile, the Doldum Hospital is in a state of complete chaos with the arrival of 20 injured patients from a bus accident. With Professor Kim in surgery, Wu Jin takes charge of the emergency situation, assigning tasks to each member of the team. When he tells Dr. Jang to prepare himself, Jang replies with a sarcastic, "Don't believe me too much." At the same time, a news report reveals that the injured patients are military officers and the shooter at the military base is a corporal. The report speculates that the suspect's motive for the shooting is gambling debt. The victims are Captain Kook and Lieutenant Park, and the suspect is being sought by their platoon members. Coincidentally, the suspect is the very person Wu Jin had rescued earlier. Director Jang fears that the shooter may still be hiding within the hospital, planning revenge on the 4 injured officers. He takes the suspect's photo and starts comparing it to the faces of people in the hospital. Nurse Oh, recognizing the suspect, alerts Wu Jin and Director Jang. Director Jang immediately informs the police, who promptly dispatch officers and military personnel to the trauma center. They request Professor Kim to evacuate the patients from Doldum Hospital as soon as possible. Sun, who still has the gun with him, takes 2 loaded weapons from the security post. Professor Kim and Dr. Cha immediately inform the doctors to evacuate the patients. The suspect appears, targeting the patient being treated by Dr. Jang. He shoves everyone out of the way, making it clear that he doesn't want to injure anyone. However, Dr. Jang, determined to protect his patient, tries to persuade the perpetrator to drop the gun. The perpetrator, fueled by intense hatred, warns Dr. Zhang that he will shoot both of them if he doesn't leave. Just in time, Wu Jin arrives at the scene. To protect Dr. Zhang and the patient, Wu Jin tells the perpetrator that his anger stems from his own incompetence, being expelled from the military for gambling, and taking out his frustration on others. The perpetrator seems to grasp the truth in Wu Jin's words and leaves with him. On the way out, Wu Jin tries to snatch the gun but fails. Overcoming his fear once more, Wu Jin urges the perpetrator to stop, emphasizing that no one has died yet and things haven't gone too far. He explains that he needs to live, because for him, death is not the solution to bad situations. Leaving the perpetrator behind, Wu Jin walks away without fear despite the weapon in the perpetrator's hand. The perpetrator ultimately surrenders, and everyone is safe. The day was filled with intense emotions, from successful surgeries to near-death encounters. The team gathers to celebrate the long day with fried chicken. Only Dr. Hojun is still working on a report and misses the celebration. Upon seeing everyone eating, he joins the festivities. They raise their chicken in a celebratory toast. For Wu Jin, every day at Doldum is a happy spring day. The joyful chatter reaches Professor Kim, who can't help but smile. However, a new crisis arises when the complaint filed by the female commissioner against Professor Chan and Dr. Young In-soo reaches Professor Kim, leaving him in a difficult situation. The scene shifts to an old building, showing signs of cracks and potential collapse. The residents and students inside are oblivious to the danger, unaware of the imminent threat. Meanwhile, Dr. Yun-Ti is anxious as he brings his girlfriend to meet his parents for the first time. Wu Jin, on the other hand, is relaxed, not even remembering how many past girlfriends he's had. Upon arriving, they find only Yun-Ti's mother, as her father is busy attending a court hearing. She laments the building's apparent curse, recalling how her son had to fight a legal battle for years, and now, even after becoming the director of the center, his father is back in court. Knowing she's hinting at Wu Jin, Yun-Ti pulls him away, but he decides to stay for dinner. Meanwhile, Representative Ko refuses to reconcile with the center director, Kang, and insists on taking the case to court. He can't understand why the province should spend a large budget on the trauma center, especially after it caused his son's tragic death. Dr. Lee is taken aback by the introduction of Elizabeth and the bone-dry replacement for Jesse, leaving him dumbfounded and wondering who they are and where he is. Xian Wong confides in Dr. Zhang Dongha about this bizarre encounter, only to learn that Dongha has also greeted them. He initially thought Dr. B was mentally unstable, but now he's even more confused as Dr. Y greets the ghosts as real friends. Suddenly, all the doctors receive news of the old building collapse, with most of the victims being students. The number of casualties is still unknown. Master Kim gathers everyone, informing them of the plan for handling this emergency. First, they must clear the emergency room, discharge patients who can go home, and move those who can't to regular rooms. Dr. Seo Wu Jin and Yun-Ti, despite being on leave, are quickly called back due to the urgent situation. The number 1 rescue team rushes to prepare their equipment and arrive at the scene as quickly as possible. The 2 lovebirds arrive at the scene, only to be met with a chaotic and terrifying sight. Victims scattered everywhere, thick smoke filling the air, and people around screaming in despair. Wu Jin can barely believe his eyes. Master Kim calls to assess the situation, urging them to stay calm and maintain a cool head to evaluate the situation and save as many lives as possible. He also emphasizes the importance of ensuring the safety of the medical personnel deployed to the site. They begin their mission, facing this battle without weapons. Yun-Ti approaches 2 students and confirms the death of one, deciding to place a black tag on him, even though the other student questions why they're abandoning their friend. Outside, the rescue team is delayed due to traffic and has to run to the scene. Dr. Iseo reminds everyone to quickly treat the most critical victims and classify patients based on color. The student starts experiencing severe abdominal pain and difficulty breathing. Luckily, Nurse Un-tak arrives with medical equipment and manages to treat him on the spot. After treatment, the patient is stabilized, tagged red as an emergency case, and taken to the hospital. At the medical center, Master Kim instructs everyone to prepare everything for the incoming patients and to check the RTS revised trauma score upon their arrival. Meanwhile, a shocking piece of news emerges. Ko Kyung-suk, The provincial assemblywoman is believed to be trapped under the collapsed building. She had visited the area to encourage vendors to relocate for the city's development project. Yoon-tae, who is helping nurse Un-tak treat a victim with internal bleeding, receives an order to return to the hospital due to a shortage of surgical staff. She quickly responds and returns with the patient. The rescue team searches for survivors amidst the rubble and discovers a group of 5 students, including one with asthma who is struggling to breathe. A teacher is trapped under concrete, unable to move. The building remains unstable and could collapse at any moment, making it impossible to bring rescue equipment inside. With limited time, Woo Jin makes the decision to go down himself to save the students. Despite Un-tak's reminders that the safety of the medical staff was paramount, he knew that abandoning the patients meant certain death. Hearing this, Un-tak decided to support the rescue effort. Seeing the two of them rush into the building, Dr. Jang was stunned, not knowing what they were doing. At the medical center, the number of injured patients kept increasing, and all the doctors were working tirelessly to save them. Everyone was in a panic, screaming and crying out. Dr. Jang informed everyone that the two had gone into the building to rescue people, which filled everyone with worry. Teacher Kim couldn't stand still, blaming the rescue team for letting the nurse go in. But Woo Jin couldn't bear to leave a teacher who had been injured while trying to save his students. The victim was diagnosed with abdominal bleeding, making it impossible to see the internal organs, but it was clear that he had suffered serious damage. His leg function was also declining. Woo Jin started administering first aid to buy time for the rescue team. Yoon-tae, who had heard what happened, was frantic upon seeing her boyfriend in such a dangerous situation. Just this morning, they were happily planning their weekend. Now, he was in a life-threatening predicament. She asked Nurse Ju to notify her immediately if there was any news about Woo Jin, so she could focus on her work. The asthmatic student had been given a breathing tube. Seeing the teacher was about to receive emergency care, the scene, though cramped and perilous, showcased their professionalism and brilliance. Dr. Yoon-tae dismissed all other thoughts, focusing on the surgery with Director Park. Their efforts paid off, and the patient's vital signs stabilized. Meanwhile, Professor Cha ignored Teacher Kim's calls and prepared to start the court hearing without the plaintiff present. The students were evacuated one by one. Dr. Jang, still searching for his colleague, wondered if he thought he was Superman for rushing in like that. The camera shifted to Councilwoman Ko Kyung-suk, who had called for help outside. However, because the councilwoman was still conscious, they would prioritize getting the severely injured patients out first. As the last student was being carried out, the concrete started to shake and collapse, sending everyone into a panic. Dr. Jang rushed over, seeing the scene of devastation once again. The hospital staff received the news, and Teacher Kim was losing his composure. All the doctors and nurses turned their worried gazes towards Yoon-tae. In the rubble, Un-tak had regained consciousness, but Woo Jin was trapped and unconscious beneath the concrete. Fortunately, Woo Jin was still alive, but was in a state of panic when he saw the steel bar piercing his surgical hands. Teacher Kim arrived at the scene of the accident. After searching, Un-tak found a phone, contacted the outside world, and reported that everyone was still alive. Everyone outside cheered at the miraculous news. However, 3 people were injured, including Seo Woo Jin, who had been impaled by a steel beam through the back of his left hand and wrist. Teacher Kim spoke to Woo Jin directly. He said the bar may have hit the ulnar nerve, and it was very painful. The bar had pierced through his hand and into the teacher's chest. Teacher Kim instructed him to stay still and calm because any movement could cause further damage. He decided to go down himself to rescue them. Everyone tried to stop him, but in this situation, if he didn't go down to provide first aid, there was no way to save Woo Jin's hands or the lives of the other 2 patients. Teacher Kim successfully found Un-tak and hugged him tightly. He approached Woo Jin and assessed the situation. The steel bar had to be removed from his hand to save the other 2, but this would severely damage Woo Jin's nerves. Without hesitation, Woo Jin agreed. If they didn't do it, all their efforts to save the teacher would be in vain. Just then, Dr. Jang decided to dive down as well. Teacher Kim told him to rush and provide emergency care for the student. The act of removing the steel bar would cause severe vibrations and injuries, a pain that would be unbearable. Ultimately, everyone prepared to saw the steel bar. Each time the saw touched the steel, Woo Jin screamed in agony. Once the steel was cut, Professor Kim immediately embraced Wu Jin, comforting him as he witnessed the bone-chilling pain. At the hospital, the news that the two were safe and returning to the hospital brought relief to the doctors. Unfortunately, Dr. Wu Jin's hands were seriously injured. He was immediately taken to surgery. Meanwhile, the lecturer was also sent to the trauma ward. Tak stayed by the patient's side until the surgery was finished, as he was the person they had both risked their lives to protect. The doctors quickly assessed the situation to prepare for surgery. Meanwhile, Professor Kim remembered Wu Jin's words, "If I get hurt, just save me." Meanwhile, the doctors were performing surgery on the lecturer, waiting for Dr. Cha to join and continue the procedure. Master Kim was also about to begin the fateful surgery for Wu Jin. After removing the steel bar, he discovered that the aorta hadn't been completely destroyed, offering some relief. While performing the surgery to repair the torn aorta, Master Kim's illness reappeared, causing his hands to tremble uncontrollably. Unfortunately, all the surgeons were occupied with other patients, and Director Cha was still at the investigation hearing. Master Kim could only grip his hands tightly and pray. Thankfully, his hands returned to normal shortly after. Everyone immediately resumed the fateful surgery to save Dr. Seo's hands. In that moment, Master Kim was like a superhero. However, a problem arose. Blood wasn't flowing through the artery. Faced with a dire situation, Master Kim utilized his decades of experience to handle it. Finally, after a difficult ordeal, they achieved a happy ending. Perhaps in that moment, Master Kim poured all his strength, experience, and luck into the surgery. Meanwhile, Dr. Cha, overcoming his grief, performed surgery to save the lecturer that Wu Jin had risked his life to protect. The scene then shifts to the hearing. After it concluded, Professor Cha immediately called his daughter to inquire about Wu Jin's condition. Yun-Ti scolded him, saying he should have been at the hospital saving patients instead of abandoning them. However, there was no other choice. He had to stand up and protect the hospital. Seeing her beloved with bandaged hands in the hospital bed, she couldn't hold back her tears. Just then, Wu Jin woke up. She informed him that they had saved the patient he had tried to protect. He praised her for doing a good job and wiped away her tears. Yun-Ti encouraged him and couldn't help but wonder why he had gone to such lengths. He explained that the lecturer was like Professor Kim, a respected teacher. If he hadn't met him, he wouldn't know where his life would have gone. They were people who helped change lives, and that was the only reason he acted as he did. At that moment, Assemblywoman Ko was also brought to the hospital and requested treatment there. Everyone was uncomfortable because the hospital only admitted critical patients. She believed the hospital was refusing treatment because of her lawsuit against them and immediately called for a transfer to another hospital. Just then, Dr. Jung arrived and noticed serious signs in her leg, which the Assemblywoman hadn't fully revealed. Dr. Jung immediately ordered an emergency surgery or she would lose her legs. She claimed the hospital was exaggerating because of its budget and refused treatment there. Dr. Jung then spoke up, saying that everyone there worked to become true doctors, and for his deceased daughter, not like those quacks outside. She could keep the lawsuit, but the surgery had to be performed immediately. Finally, Assemblywoman Ko agreed to treatment, fearing she would lose her leg. That night, Professor Cha returned home and spoke with Master Kim. He had known about his illness for a long time and arrogantly thought that Master Kim couldn't do anything without him. However, Professor Cha didn't realize that he was only Master Kim's plan B. By not returning that day, Professor Cha had effectively been eliminated from the game. The scene shifts to the next hearing after the councilwoman's treatment was unsuccessful. The court ruled in favor of the trauma center, thanks to Professor Cha's convincing arguments. The accident with the councilwoman's son was an unfortunate event due to the nationwide shortage of surgeons. The councilwoman stated she would appeal, but Professor Cha was not worried. He had dealt with many people like her in his career, calling her troublesome for shifting all the blame onto others. He refused to apologize because doing so would be equivalent to admitting guilt. She recalled her conversation with Dr. Kim. She couldn't understand why he had partnered with Professor Cha, considering their opposing personalities and beliefs. However, she recognized that a well-functioning organization can't be one-sided. Professor Cha's expertise was top-notch, so collaboration was a natural progression. She mentioned an incident from a few years ago, where a third-year resident jumped from the 49th floor due to pressure from Professor Cha. Dr. Kim was still baffled when she offered a proposition. If the trauma center fired Professor Cha, she would withdraw her lawsuit and allocate government funds to develop the center. Meanwhile, a mysterious person dressed in a doctor's uniform entered Professor Cha's office and left a mysterious box on his desk. The scene changes to Yoon-tae's mother arriving at her daughter's house with her belongings. She decided to move in with her daughter, despite not discussing it beforehand. Yoon-tae's living arrangement with Woo-jin was soon revealed, as she hadn't yet put away his personal belongings. Her mother demanded she make Woo-jin move out, as the family didn't accept cohabitation before marriage. If anyone found out, Yoon-tae's parents would be embarrassed to face society. The next day, Yoon-tae overheard a conversation between Dr. B and Dr. Kim while going to work. They discussed the possibility of Woo-jin's hands suffering permanent damage after treatment. This was practically a death sentence for a surgeon. Dr. Kim sighed in exasperation. Yoon-tae couldn't hold back her tears. She brought Woo-jin's clothes and physiotherapy equipment to him. Just by looking at him, he knew she was worried. He reassured her, saying he would return to his best state. He had overcome countless difficulties, so this was nothing compared to those. He was even considered a symbol of resilience. Woo-jin's words prompted Yoon-tae to propose marriage to him. She could sense something was wrong with him and acted impulsively. Woo-jin didn't want to get married under these circumstances. Just then, a critically ill patient was brought in. The patient was experiencing shortness of breath and had signs of cardiac arrest. The patient's pulse had stopped, necessitating immediate CPR. Dr. Jang rushed to the scene and began first aid, then skillfully used his expertise to treat the patient. After a series of ostrich-style chest compressions, he managed to pull the patient back from the brink of death. Afterward, he asked Dr. Wyon if his earlier appearance was cool, making her laugh. Yoon-taek, standing nearby, watched them laugh and talk, seemingly a little jealous. Meanwhile, Director Park discussed the hospital's severe budget shortage with Dr. Kim, asking if he should consider the councilwoman's offer. But Dr. Kim believed it was a trap. If they easily accepted her offer, it would be like handing her a weapon. She would only demand more. Professor Cha returned from the court hearing and noticed a pen with Sang Min's name engraved on it. Sang Min was the resident who had jumped from the building, as mentioned by the councilwoman. Professor Cha rushed to the security cameras to check who had entered his office, but couldn't identify the person because they wore a paper mask. Suspecting an employee, he checked the doctor's personnel records. Dr. Lee was the most suspicious. He summoned Dr. Lee to confirm his suspicion and accuse him. He believed Dr. Lee was seeking revenge for being denied access to the operating room 3 years ago because he was colorblind. Dr. Lee was the only person from Sang Min's graduating class. However, Dr. Lee denied everything, claiming he had never been to the office. Professor Cha insisted on firing Dr. Lee because he felt threatened. Woo-jin arrived with the laptop containing the footage of the stranger, heading to Yang to ask who visited him, as he also had a paper bag. Dr. Kim asked Professor Cha why he wanted to fire Dr. Lee. Professor Cha argued that Lee Seon-woong was the one who brought the pen to threaten him. He claimed Seon-woong wasn't qualified to be a doctor because he hid his colorblindness. But colorblindness wasn't a significant issue. There were no rules barring colorblind individuals from becoming doctors. Seon-woong had never hidden his condition, openly disclosing it in his application and receiving Dr. Kim's approval for entry into the hospital. Furthermore, the footage didn't confirm it was Dr. Lee. Yoon-tae sat in a daze, listening to her father's story from years ago. She couldn't believe he might have killed someone and blamed it on another. She had always considered him a real superhero. The scene shifts to Dr. Lee returning to his room, visibly panicked, and recalling the discussion between the councilwoman and Dr. Kim. He had rejected the councilwoman's offer, not wanting to perpetuate a cycle of revenge. Director Park noticed him outside. Dr. Lee snapped back to reality and quickly stashed the paper bag inside his desk drawer. Director Park, without hesitation, admitted to Dr. Kim that he had orchestrated this whole situation to fire Professor Cha for the sake of the trauma center. As director, he felt responsible for the hospital. Previously, he had tried to recruit highly skilled doctors, but they all refused, citing the sole reason as being unable to work under Professor Cha's direction. He had also shown a lack of responsibility by being absent during the building collapse incident and refusing to offer a sincere apology to Councilwoman Ko Kyung-suk, escalating the situation. Firing Cha Jin-man was the best course of action at this time. Dr. Kim countered that Councilwoman Ko Kyung-suk was driven by personal vendetta and would never allocate that enormous budget to the center. Meanwhile, the councilwoman was on the phone with Congressman Yu, informing him that everything at the trauma center was unfolding as they expected. The budget call was promptly halted. Woo Jin returned to his room to find Dr. Jang informing him that someone had dropped off his clothes and personal belongings. He also mentioned meeting Yoon Tae and learning that Dr. Seo had been evicted from his apartment. Yoon Tae rushed to check on Dr. Seo, but her mother called Woo Jin outside to talk. She expressed her disappointment with their living arrangement and demanded they end the relationship. However, Woo Jin explained that they were both over 30, mature adults who had carefully considered their decision. Their feelings for each other were genuine, and living together only strengthened their relationship. But she argued that he had grown up in a home without parents and she couldn't trust him with her daughter. He might be a good doctor, but being a good husband and father was a different story. Yoon Tae rushed out, apologizing to Dr. Lee for what he had to endure because of her father. Dr. Lee, mature and composed, addressed the matter calmly, considering Yoon Tae his senior. Her apology somewhat eased his mood. That night, the two elders engaged in a heated argument. Dr. Kim had never considered Professor Cha a rival and didn't want him to leave. He had invited Professor Cha to collaborate to help him find a different path. But it seemed Professor Cha was now consumed by petty things. However, Professor Cha argued that he couldn't abandon his pride and honor as a doctor who had been slandered. He had worked hard only to receive insults and resentment in return. Dr. Kim urged him to let go of his ego and work together to build the center until it succeeds. He advised him not to resign or run away because if he did, they would be no longer friends or anything. Yoon Tae went home and erupted in anger towards her mother. She had been living independently for over 3 years. Her mother was invading her privacy. Instead of objecting, why not bless their relationship? Nobody is perfect, even her father. Her words were heard by her father outside, who was saddened. He arranged to meet Woo Jin for drinks and a heart-to-heart conversation. He wanted Woo Jin to understand the sense of responsibility. A doctor's skills are directly related to a patient's life. That year, he wanted the young man to understand this, but he couldn't handle the pressure and took such a reckless action. He didn't understand how today's Gen Z easily talks about what they want, but readily crumble under responsibility. They are weak-willed, demanding, lazy, but want good results. Woo Jin didn't deny his words, but explained that today's generation is very different. They live in a time where people have to struggle daily. He didn't blame Professor Cha for the death, but talked about his great teacher. Sometimes, he would scold and yell when he was unsatisfied, but he never abandoned anyone under any circumstances. He covered the blanket for his department's revenge-seeking student, scolded patients for being drunk and calling doctors beautiful sisters, and gave Dr. Lee the opportunity to perform a challenging surgery with his guidance. Dr. Kim taught each student in his own way. Lee Zeon-won confided in his teacher, saying he wanted revenge for his friend's death and the discrimination he faced. However, he didn't realize that wasn't the best revenge. The best way was to become a better person than them so that those who looked down on him would feel remorse. Dr. Kim believed that if he dedicated himself to training and learning for 10 years, he could surely surpass Professor Cha. Therefore, he shouldn't destroy his own life with such petty, meaningless actions. He then told him to leave, adding, "Don't smile like that, or I might fall for you." Oh, what a clumsy and adorable look. The next morning, Yoon Tae returned home and was startled to see Woo Jin coming out of the bathroom, naked. She quickly covered him up, worried that her father might see, but he had already left for the hospital early that morning to submit his resignation to Director Park. Before leaving, he advised him not to be overly confident in his abilities and intelligence. We all pay a price for our decisions. When Yoon Tae arrived, he had already packed his belongings and returned to Seoul. He apologized for leaving a negative image of a father in her eyes and hoped she would visit him and Woo Jin soon. Regardless, he was still a good person and a hero in her eyes. Dr. Kim was saddened when he learned about the situation. Ultimately, his words and encouragement couldn't change anything. In the following days, Director Park sought out Councilwoman Ko to discuss their previous agreement. She confirmed that she would withdraw the appeal but said the budget allocation to the center would have to wait. She didn't hesitate to blatantly change her mind. Director Cha had been dealt with, and now it was the trauma center's turn for retribution. Director Park began to regret not listening to his seniors. Dr. Kim had anticipated Councilwoman Ko's plan and jokingly taunted Director Park, saying, "As the saying goes, fish that don't eat salt get spoiled." The director position at the trauma center would be taken by someone more qualified than Professor Cha Kang-dong-ju, a general surgeon from Doldum Hospital. They exchanged looks full of unspoken threats, and Dr. Kim approached them with a mischievous smile. Dong-ju sat down for coffee with Dr. Kim, learning he had full authority over the trauma center but had to adhere to the rules. Meanwhile, Dr. Kang had become the trauma center director. He decided to work in the same office as the other doctors instead of having a separate room, so he could get to know them better. This made Yoon-tae uncomfortable. Dong-ju gathered the activation teams and key personnel to announce new work principles. From then on, the trauma center wouldn't admit patients without trauma injuries. The patient classification criteria were based on clear regulations. This would overburden Doldum Hospital, but they would have to manage. Dong-ju and Dr. Young In-soo would be directly responsible for patient classification. In the following days, accident victims were brought to the trauma center, but Dong-ju instructed them to be transferred to Doldum Hospital for treatment. Doldum Hospital was constantly busy, overwhelmed with patients. Yoon-tak, about to give Dr. Y on the flowers, was called to work. The Doldum doctors ran around like dogs off their leash, struggling to handle the influx of patients. Meanwhile, the trauma center hadn't received a single patient in days. Dr. Kim, despite being exhausted, seemed excited to work tirelessly. However, Dong-ju always acted with a plan, so there must be a reason behind his actions. Dr. Lee called Yoon-tae to ask about a treatment for a patient with an abdominal aortic blockage due to blood clots. Dr. Kim was performing a different surgery and couldn't help Lee Seon-woong. The patient was turning blue, and without immediate intervention, he could die. Yoon-tae immediately asked Dong-ju for advice, but he refused to let her participate. Dr. Cha couldn't take it anymore, seeing Dong-ju sending all the patients to Doldum Hospital. Dong-ju responded that he was simply directing them to the right place. Her job was to wait. But the patient had stopped breathing, so Yoon-tae ignored Dong-ju's orders and went to perform the surgery herself. Meanwhile, Woo-jin was diligently undergoing rehabilitation training. Yoon-tae had just started a surgery when the trauma center received a report of a 3-car pileup accident, with 6 patients, a truck driver, a van driver, his daughter, and 3 members of a family. A severe case involved one patient with abdominal injury and low blood pressure, another with chest and abdominal trauma, and a child injured by the seatbelt. Dong-ju called Dr. Kim for advice. Dr. Kim asked him to handle the pediatric case as he was in the middle of a surgery. The 3 less severe patients would be transferred to Doldum. Dr. Kim was furious when he learned Dr. Chow was performing surgery at Doldum Hospital. He was worried about the trauma center. How could Dong-ju handle 3 surgeries at once? The accident victims arrived. The 2 critical patients were taken to the trauma center, while the child was sent to the monitoring room. After considering the situation, Dr. Kang decided to handle the peritoneal hemorrhage case and asked Dr. Young In-soo to check on the child in the monitoring room. Dr. Nam suggested seeking help from Doldum Hospital, but Dong-ju remained silent and stuck to his plan. Woo-jin appeared, looking incredibly cool, to everyone's astonishment. Even with his injured left hand, he still had his skilled right hand. He would assist Dong-ju in the surgery. Seeing Dong-ju's technique and dexterity, Woo-jin understood why he was called the first-generation legend of Doldum. However, even with such high skill, the patient would once again face death. Yoon-tae's father was worried when he learned that Woo-jin had returned due to the overwhelming number of patients. Yoon-tak asked her father to breathe deeply and continue with the surgery. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the patient died. At the same time, the child fell into a coma. A CT scan of the patient with chest and abdominal injuries revealed damage to the liver and spleen, 6 fractured ribs, and what seemed like punctured lungs on both sides. He needed open chest surgery. Dong-ju called Dr. Cha to ask for a treatment plan. but she apologized, saying she was busy with another surgery. Dongju criticized her for not listening to his instructions and taking matters into her own hands, leaving no one to perform the surgery. What would she do if the patient died? Wu Jin took his phone and said he would handle the liver hemorrhage before Dr. Cha could return. She should focus on her current surgery and then rush back. He thought she simply wanted to help people and didn't deserve criticism. But Dongju had warned her before. She was putting the patients there in danger. She shouldn't use Dr. Kim's teachings as an excuse. Only one person could do it like him, and that was him. She shouldn't be like a parrot, chasing after a heron and dying. It's not about not being able to catch the heron, but getting lost while chasing it. The moment she loses her direction is when everything ends. Yun-Ti, having finished her surgery, rushed back to the trauma center. Xiao Wu-Jin was worried when he saw Senior Dongju decided to perform the surgery alone without waiting for Yun-Ti. But he said that one must have the ability to dare to do something like that. Wu-Jin was truly amazed when Dongju successfully removed the patient's damaged spleen within just 15 minutes. Upon arriving at the surgery room, Yun-Ti was astonished by what Dr. Dongju had accomplished. She decided to take charge of the surgery and make all the decisions. She would have to explain her actions today, or she would have to leave the trauma center team. After the surgery, the two had a tense confrontation. Dongju argued that Yun-Ti's unauthorized absence from her position led to the death of a patient. "Don't think that just because you can run a marathon, you can also run 100 meters, Dongju said. That's the difference between the trauma center and the emergency room. Even though they are both part of the same hospital, they have completely different systems. You can't stay here if you don't change your mind." Yun-Ti retorted that she was the only thoracic surgeon at the trauma center. "You can easily kick me out?" she asked. However, Dongju had already established a team of trauma specialists from the United States, so Yun-Ti needn't worry about that. Yun-Ti was furious and accused him of trying to take over and change the staff at the center. Dr. Zhang was mobilizing people to boycott Dongju. Nurse Ju and Yun-Ti agreed to boycott him and even involved Dr. Young. Yun-Ti demanded Dongju retract his directives from the past few days, or they would refuse to work. The trauma center was her dream and aspiration, and she would not leave it. Dongju refused to accept their tactic of using patient lives to threaten him. 30 minutes later, Dongju sent a list of doctors who were prepared to work at the hospital. However, Professor Kim had previously given him the authority to manage personnel, so this time he didn't want to interfere and let Dongju make the decision. He didn't believe Dongju would let the center be ruined. Professor Kim met with Yun-Ti and encouraged her, saying she shouldn't worry about the dull damn hospital because he was taking care of it. "Don't do anything you wouldn't normally do for any reason," he said. "Don't boycott anyone. Just return to your position. You know better than anyone how hurtful and damaging being ostracized can be, yet you're using that method to solve the problem. I really did teach you wrong. Instead of complaining and asking what's wrong with him, ask why are they doing this? Put yourself in their shoes to understand better. Then, you'll have many ways to solve the problem." Meanwhile, the Provincial Budget Committee arrived at the trauma center for a visit. Coincidentally, the committee member recognized Dongju. He had previously performed surgery on the committee member's brother. The atmosphere seemed to lighten considerably. Hospital Director Park praised Dongju for his excellent memory, unaware that he had prepared beforehand. The center's phone was ringing continuously, but no one answered. The committee member couldn't help but wonder what kind of establishment this was. The director and Dongju were still desperately trying to secure funding, unaware that the assemblyman had been involved in a bribe scheme behind the scenes. Dr. Young tried to answer the phone but was too late. He was startled to find out that the person standing next to him was a member of the Health and Welfare Committee here to conduct an inspection. He lied, saying everyone was in a meeting, which was why the hospital was so quiet and empty. At the same time, everyone's phone rang with notifications about a recent forest fire. Wu Jin ran to everyone and urged them to return to the trauma center, saying this was an emergency. "If you want to boycott," he said, "we need to save people first." Outside, patients were being brought in one after another, mostly rescue workers in critical condition. The small number of remaining doctors made everyone increasingly anxious. Fortunately, the core members of the trauma center returned, and the initial chaos quickly subsided. Dal Dam Hospital quickly received the first patients, and the doctors rushed to assess their conditions. Dr. Lee found a patient in serious condition, but due to his color blindness, couldn't recognize the burns as his colleagues described. He became scared and panicked, but thankfully, Professor Kim arrived to assist him. Professor Kim instructed Dr. Yang to cleanse the patient's body with saline because they were exposed to toxins from the factory. He also ordered the management to set up a decontamination tent outside before admitting the factory patients. At the trauma center, patients continued to arrive. Yoon Tae calmly assessed the situation with Assistant High EO and determined it was a case of multiple trauma plus brain hemorrhage. She asked Woo Jin to prepare for surgery, but Dong-ju announced that he was busy with another surgery and would operate with her instead. Yoon Tae refused to work with him because she felt uncomfortable and irritated. "Even if you're uncomfortable, you have to bear with it," Dong-ju said. "This is no time to be picky." Meanwhile, Dr. Young had been performing CPR on In-chul for 30 minutes, but couldn't stop death. Everyone was heartbroken because he died on duty at such a young age. Woo Jin requested another surgery, but his anesthesiologist was on leave and wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. Just then, Professor Shin appeared unexpectedly. She was supposed to arrive tomorrow. Professor Shin was impressed to see Dong-ju there. She thought the picture Professor Kim envisioned was slowly coming together, piece by piece. The young doctors were fulfilling their life's mission professionally and with passion. The vision of a beautiful picture they had dreamed of was unfolding right there. The patients who were contaminated by toxic gas were decontaminated outside the hospital and brought in on the first day. Shortly after, a hot piece of news came in. The wind direction had changed, causing the fire to shift towards Dal Dam Hospital. It could reach the hospital in 30 minutes. Everyone was incredulous. The heart and soul of their entire lives was at risk of being burnt to the ground by the fire's immense destructive power. The head of the rescue team asked Professor Kim to prepare for the worst. He stood frozen, staring at the operating room where the surgeons were still diligently saving lives. Meanwhile, Assistant High EO's condition was worsening. Professor Kim asked UNTAC to prepare for surgery with him and informed Hospital Director Park. As expected, the fire was soon approaching. Dr. B gathered everyone and explained the situation and evacuation plan. Everyone had to stay calm to avoid negatively affecting the patient's mental state. Woo Jin decided to join Professor Kim in the room. Every minute was precious at this point. Everyone was assigned a task and worked diligently. After a while, Professor Kim asked everyone to stop and focus completely on this nerve-wracking moment. True to his incredible talent, he succeeded once again in front of his students. Everyone continued their tasks and prepared for the evacuation. Professor Kim praised them for their excellent work and stepped out, leaving behind a somber atmosphere. Dong-ju and the others couldn't believe they had just performed their first surgery together, which might also be their last. Hospital Director Park checked every corner to confirm that no one was left behind. He also asked Professor Kim to leave immediately before the fire reached them. Professor Kim silently observed the ideal he had pursued and actualized throughout his life, now enveloped in smoke. After evacuating all the patients, it was time for the hospital staff to leave. But suddenly, Woo Jin couldn't find Professor Kim. Everyone panicked and started searching. Nurse Oh ran to the operating room and found Professor Kim inside. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they saw he was safe. Professor Kim stood quietly in the operating room, where he had saved countless patients from death's door, lost in contemplation. Nurse Oh knew that Professor Cha Jin-man and Dr. Kang Dong-ju were both skilled and promising doctors, but there was a difference between having skills and having influence. Only Professor Kim could draw everyone to work at this place. As long as he existed, even if this place burned to ashes, everyone could gather again because of him. She then gave Professor Kim a small, cute candy, which warmed his heart and made them smile brightly. As everyone was being evacuated, they suddenly heard thunder. Rain began to fall, a true miracle. The fire was slowly being contained. If it kept raining like this, the hospital would be saved. They jumped and danced with joy like children. Inside, Nurse Oh and Professor Kim were also overjoyed to see the fire alarm level drop to the lowest. Their hospital was truly saved. The sparrows embraced each other in happiness. Meanwhile, Dong-ju received a call from Yoon and sounded affectionate, even saying he missed her. At that moment, Assemblywoman Ko drove to the hospital and cried for help. She was covered in blood, and 2 of her staff members were badly injured outside her car while inspecting the fire scene. The ambulances weren't working, so she drove them herself. One man had stopped breathing, and the other had been impaled in the chest. The doctors took turns performing CPR and did their best to save their lives. Dong-ju, having just learned of the situation, immediately rushed in to help. Nurse Wyon asked the assemblywoman to go outside and wash her wounds, but she stared tearfully at her assistants. She couldn't hold back her tears at the sight. The next morning, Assemblywoman Ko woke up with a start from a horrifying dream. She immediately asked about the situation and learned that the doctors had operated all night. The patient who had stopped breathing had been resuscitated but was still being operated on. She was surprised that the doctors had worked non-stop all night. Inside the operating room, Dong-ju was worried when he saw Professor Kim's hands. "Don't be scared," Professor Kim said. "These hands are still sharp. My skills are still smooth and agile, just like they've always been." Dong-ju thanked Professor Kim for allowing him to observe so many complex surgeries, which is how he became who he is today. Professor Kim thought differently. "You had the ability from the beginning," he said. Professor Kim looked from the outside, seeing the things he once considered fleeting now becoming meaningful. He recalled the younger days of the people present: Seo Sin, eager to operate with him; Dong-ju, stubborn and prone to doing things his own way; Yoon-tae, and Woo-jin. They had all grown and were confidently standing in the operating room, doing their jobs well. It was the moment their dreams became reality. As Professor Kim left the operating room, he encountered Assemblywoman Ko. He didn't bother to talk to her and left immediately. It's curious why he didn't say anything. Wouldn't this have been a good opportunity for him to speak? Professor Kim thought that Assemblywoman Ko already had her answer. "You want to restructure the city," he said. "But what will the city be like without a hospital? People injured in fires and natural disasters will have nowhere to go and will die in ambulances searching for a hospital. The death of your son is truly heartbreaking, but don't use it as an excuse to turn a blind eye to what you should be doing. Don't be political correctly and honestly." Outside, the evacuation order was lifted, and hospital staff began to return to work. Everyone was chatting happily and comfortably. Hospital Director Park received encouragement from head nurse Oh for his efforts over the past time and was given a cup of super sweet coffee. Yoon-tae prepared a very nice watch for Woo-jin's birthday, while he prepared an engagement ring to propose to her on this special day. Meanwhile, after 2 years of hard work, Dr. Yang was finally preparing to leave. When he went to say goodbye to Professor Kim, he was given a surgical knife that Professor Kim had intended for his sister but never had the chance to give her. Dr. Yang's farewell ceremony took place, and he saw everyone happily chatting and laughing together. He decided to stay at Daldam for another term because he had people he loved here and was able to do what he enjoyed. Yoon-tae chose to give Woo-jin a birthday gift discreetly, but with heartwarming messages. When she woke up the next morning, she found the ring on her finger. She hugged Woo-jin tightly. What could be better than the ring and its meaning? Daldam Hospital received approval for the funding grant. Once again, everyone had a burning desire and faith. Assemblywoman Ko also trusted the hospital again, but every year they had to show her how hard they were working. The film ends with everyone putting on their white coats again to continue their mission. Each new patient brings new experiences and fresh truths. Don't give up on your journey to find the reason for life and the purpose for which you live. The moment you give up, everything ends.